Good morning, everybody. Good morning, everybody. This is Peter Varnowski from Choice for Homes again. I'm doing my weekly video today, and I've decided to change up a format a little bit today. I didn't have a topic that I really prepared for the discussion. However, over the course of the week, I joined a new Facebook group called Real Estate Deal Makers, and the guy who runs the group, Mike Callis, he asked a really good question that I thought it would be beneficial if I discussed with the rest of you folks. So I'm going to read the question that he asked me, and of course, you know, as usual, I kind of presented, talked a little bit about what we do and how we buy portfolios of fully rented houses for cash flow purposes. And the question he wrote was the following. He said, Peter, I have had significant challenges with homes that are already tenanted. I would love some of your thoughts on overcoming that. For example, we only use electronic debits and pull on the 25th to ensure owners are paid on time. But if there are already tenants, sometimes I can't duplicate that. We like a streamlined lease so all the tenants are the same, often in bulk already tenanted deals. That doesn't happen. Additionally, we like to screen the tenants, get in contact with them prior to move-in, so we are all on the same page with expectations. Sometimes when we buy the home with tenants, the tenants basically ignore us. It is a lot easier to place the tenants after we purchase them. Also, there are some cash flow advantages to having completed. What have you done to knock out those challenges? So, based on the question that he asked, and based on some follow-up conversations that we had, we've established that Mike he runs a property management company as well as an investment business, and they tend to self-manage their portfolios. So he looks at the challenge of already tenanted homes from a perspective of managing those homes actively. To disclose, I always use third-party management companies. So some of the challenges that are really close to his heart might be we outsource to a third party, and we may not be as sensitive to it. However, since we finance all of our deals and we structure them in a specific way, usually with one or two partners, we are really sensitive to the financial performance of the portfolio that starts right away. So today I wrote a big reply to Mike, but I wanted to kind of walk through my answer and also talk a little bit more on some of the points. So the way I approached the answer is, I said there are pros and cons associated with buying both vacant properties and fully tenanted. And so for vacant properties, the pros goes as follows. They're easy to inspect. So obviously when you have a portfolio of 10 vacant homes, they're all available for inspection right away. So your inspector can go in and out. There are no tenants to coordinate with, no prior notice to be given. So that part of the due diligence can actually be easier. However, there are things that are harder to detect because nobody lives in the unit. For example, if the refrigerator doesn't work all that great, the inspector usually won't catch it because they're not there long enough. Second pro, you get to screen the tenants. So of course all of the tenants you place in there, they're going to be your tenants. They're going to go through your screening process, so the quality of tenants is going to be up to the standard that you have internally for your properties. That is on one hand it's great. On the other hand, it's additional cost. You get to pay for screening of the tenants, and if you're using third-party management company, you get to pay the placement fees. You get to have a lease in place right away. So one of the questions that he said, Mike asked was, I like to streamline my leases. All of my leases are the same. Yes, with the fully rented properties, of course, again, once you get the tenant in there, they are immediately on your lease. So right from the beginning, all of your leases are going to be standard, and it's going to be a lot more efficient to manage those tenants. Once you have the entire portfolio tenanted, you're going to have a stabilized portfolio right away, especially if you do your screening really well. So, those are the again, to disclose, I'm not a property manager. We usually outsource that. I manage a few properties myself, but they are usually they're not Class C properties. I don't like managing Class C properties myself. So most of my answers are going to be from a perspective of an investor. So if there is a property manager out there who disagrees or he wants to contribute to the discussion, please feel free to leave a comment or ask a question. So some of the cons that I identified with buying vacant properties, and from an investor perspective, they are fairly significant. So first of all, when you're buying a portfolio of vacant properties, there is no documented history of what the tenants were paying in the past. When I negotiate for the price of the portfolio, I usually use income approach to determine what the fair value is and to determine what's the best value I can pay to the seller. When there is no good history of rents, you end up having to work with a market estimate. And of course, the seller's estimate is going to be significantly different from my estimate because I'll be conservative. The seller will want to be as optimistic as possible. And potentially they'll have a couple of agents who are also trying to be optimistic because they might have wanted to list the property or they're working for a seller. So that is a significant drawback to me, especially if it's a new market where I don't currently have rental units. If, for example, if this was Pensacola, where I have 17 houses in a specific area, in that area I kind of know what the rents are going to be. When you're nationwide and when you are opening a new market, having a good history of actual rents is really helpful to establish what the right price is for the portfolio. Potentially unknown maintenance and repairs issues. When you have a tenant in the house, there might be there are maintenance issues that are actually harder to detect. For example, if there is a slow water leak and the tenant is not going to tell you about it, you might not see it. Let's say the bathroom is being used and the inspector looks, there is some moisture there. It could be from splashing or whatever. But the reality of it, it's stuff is leaking inside the wall. Now, were it a vacant unit, an inspector would come in and say, "Oh, there is moisture here, so there is a water leak." So some things are harder to detect because there are people living and using the unit, and you have to be ready for that. Possible upfront repair costs. So when you have a vacant unit and you're buying a vacant unit, a lot of the times you have to spend money before you can place tenant in there. This is especially true if you're planning to put a Section 8 or a hub tenant in there, because they will have certain requirements for what the property to qualify, and you have to spend you potentially spend money on it. Then the biggest one for me is always no positive cash flow for the first several months after you buy the property or you buy the portfolio. If you bought 10 houses that are vacant, it might take a couple months to fill them. The first month's rent is going to go to property management as a placement fee. So you could potentially be looking at 3 months or more of no cash flow, while you're going to have your mortgage payment right away. So if you spend $1 million and you're paying $8,000 or $6,000 a month in mortgage and in interest and principal payments, you better have that money ready, and you better have some money set aside just in case if your units don't place as fast as you need to be, or if the immediate repairs that are needed take longer than expected. For example, if you start remodeling the unit, something comes up, and now instead of a few weeks, you're looking at 2 months of repairs. Sorry for that. Hazards of being live. No documented vacancy history. That's the other one, the other big issue. If you're not familiar with the area and you haven't owned anything there before, when you go in, I usually have a rule of thumb for what my vacancies should be on average for Class C portfolio. I'm usually go between 5 and 8%. But having if the portfolio is vacant, there is no history to validate it against. So there is potentially some risk there. And then the final con of vacant units is they're much harder to finance. Most of the banks will want to see a history of rents. And for example, a couple of institutions that I borrowed from before, they'll have a requirement that in order for the loan to go through, the portfolios have to be 95% rented. Then in that case, you can actually get 4, 5, 6% money, 75% loan to value. When you have a vacant portfolio, it's a totally different ball game as far as that risk profile for the lender. And so you're more likely to get something closer to hard money, and it's going to be a value. From their perspective, it's a value add. Once you get tenants in there, once you stabilize it, you might be able to refi, but of course it costs money to refi, and you're going to be paying much higher interest rate during the first 3 or 4 months or 5 or 6 months of owning that portfolio when you're potentially not collecting any rents. So from a buyer's perspective, that's significant. Now let's talk about fully tenanted portfolios and some of the pros of fully rented units. So first of all, established rents. As I said, when you are going into price negotiation, the simplest way of coming up with the price is you're saying, here's what the units are renting for right now. Send me a rent roll. Based on that rent roll, I can make you an offer. Most of the time, people will also send you a rent roll that has a column of actual rents with a market rents next to that. I find that column interesting, but I'm always going to be negotiating based on the actual rents. And it's a strong position. Doesn't always work, but again, you have to be as an operator, you have to be willing to walk away from any deal. If you're not, then you're not getting the best deal for your investors. Established vacancy history. That also helps. If I get a portfolio and I see that over the last year or two there have been 10 or 15% vacancy in that portfolio, you better ask why, because my numbers are usually budgeting for, as I said, 5 to 8%. If that number is significantly higher than that, now the question is it something that the current owner was doing wrong or right? It doesn't necessarily mean they might have been keeping X number of units offline because they were remodeling them consistently, and that's why the vacancies were high. Or were they just not operating efficiently, or is there issue with the property management company placing tenants fast enough? So if the vacancies are high, historical vacancies are high, you better find out why before you commit to buying the portfolio. Somewhat established maintenance history. So again, when you get a portfolio that has currently people living in it, then there's going to be history of maintenance and repairs, and both the maintenance that are too high is a problem, and the maintenance that is too low is a problem. So when the maintenance is too high, again, you need to find out why. Is it just that the current owner is using the maintenance funds to upgrade the units as tenants move in and move out, or are they just does he have weak lease, and every time the tenant plugs a toilet, the landlord pays for it, right? So you need to understand that. Also, if there has been no maintenance whatsoever for years, you know the properties are going to be in poor condition. So, that's why I like seeing that. Again, when you're buying full tenanted portfolio, the next point for that is going to be if any of your portion of your portfolio is going to be government subsidies like HUD, Section 8, HAP. Those houses are going to be already approved with those programs, so you won't have to spend any money on them until the tenant moves out and the new tenant moves in. And that could be within the first year, or it could be multiple years. Usually there's going to be some kind of a distribution where not all of your houses will rotate every year. So you'll already know how many of your Section 8 properties, or how many of your houses already approved for Section 8, and that's really good for you. And then finally, you're going to have immediate cash flow. The day after you close, the rents are going to be flowing into your pocket rather than the sellers, and those cash flows are going to be available to pay mortgage, to pay for onboarding expenses, to potentially do some repairs and things like that. So really helpful to have that money. Otherwise, what you need to do is you need to budget 6 months worth of cash flows plus some repair budget and include it in an acquisition cost. At least that's what I would recommend. Now, what about the cons of buying fully occupied properties? So, of course, you're inheriting a bunch of leases. And I've seen portfolios, like I was looking at a portfolio of about 50 homes. And they had 5 different agents who prepared the leases. So there were 5 templates for different leases. Half of them were hard, half of them weren't. Some leases, landlord paid water, sewer, garbage. It was a huge mess. And so, of course, when you inherited that, if your lease is still in force for another 6 months, you have to honor that lease for those 6 months. You can't just go in and force the tenants to sign a new lease until their old lease has run out. Now, could you go in and maybe give them some kind of incentive and get them to sign to a new lease if that's that important to you? I would try it. I would say, hey, how about a 3 month worth of rent if you sign the new lease right away, and then see what the tenants will say, as an idea. Now, the second problem, again, is going to be you're going to inherit out of some problem tenants. Most of the portfolios that I've seen, they tend to have mostly good tenants who pay the bills, with a few scattered that are either late or might be in pre-eviction type of situation, or just generally problem tenants. So you're going to inherit them and you'll have to deal with them. I'm going to talk a little bit later about how to mitigate some of those risks, but as soon as you buy that portfolio, they're your problem. Okay. So again, and I mentioned that before, when a unit is fully tenanted, it's harder to find a certain type of maintenance issues. When the unit is vacant, it's harder to find other types of maintenance issues. So there, it might not make that much difference. So the fourth priority, you have to wait to the end of the lease to change rent and modify rent. If you think the market, if you want to try and push the rents up and bring them up to the market, again, you'll have to wait until the lease runs out for each of your tenants before you can switch them to the new lease terms or to the new lease amount, or to have maybe restructure who pays utilities and things like that. The other problem is when you do that, a lot of those tenants will leave. And so when people say, oh, you just buy this and then here's my actual rents, but here's the market rent, you can just buy it and you can quickly raise the rents, I always kind of call a BS on that one, because it costs money to push up the leases. You're going to significantly increase your vacancy and your rotation rates, and you will potentially have to turn units more than you normally would, and you're going to have to pay placement fees to your management company and a few other expenses. So just be ready for that. And then, because you're going to have because you're going to inherit some problem leases, you're going to inherit some problem tenants, you would potentially be pushing the leases at the end of the lease terms. Because of all of that, your portfolio will probably perform less than pro forma during the first year. So again, budget for that. Another way of looking at it is, if your pro forma is set up based on performance of the portfolio right after it closes, then it will perform better the second year than it does the first year. That's the way I prefer to look at it. Right? So how can you mitigate some of the risks of buying fully tenanted properties? Again, I prefer my properties fully tenanted. Why? Because I don't manage them myself, so a lot of the risks associated with purchasing fully rented houses are operational, and the property management company will have to deal with them. So again, I'm less sensitive for that, and my property management is probably going to be more sensitive to that. The reason I don't like to buy less than 10 homes at a time is because when you have 10 homes or more, 10 homes, 20 homes, 30 homes, now all of a sudden you're bringing a large enough chunk of business to a property management where they will be, even though they know they're going to have to, they're going to have some growing pains with that portfolio, they're still going to be willing to take it on, and they're going to be willing to give you a good price because you're bringing in a good chunk of business for them. But before you buy anything, the best way to protect yourself from bad leases and bad tenants is to really spend a lot of time on due diligence prior to purchase. And your due diligence should include, somebody should review every lease agreement in that portfolio. If you're buying 86 houses, like I'm looking at right now, there's going to be 86 leases that's hopefully somebody other than me will have to review. Or more likely, I'm going to be reviewing a good chunk of them, and then I'm going to ask my partner, or maybe get an intern to review the leases and take down all of the main terms and conditions in those leases. Second, you want to look at tenant ledgers, and you want to look at tenant roll, rent roll. And rent roll is going to have all of the, so the leases are going to say what the contract says they should be collecting. Rent roll is going to say what do they truly collect, and the ledgers are going to say have they actually gotten that money from the tenant. For those of you who haven't dealt with those documents before, the rent roll is the statement that property management company presents to the owner, and it basically says this is which unit is rented for how much, and this is how much of that you're getting. And then the tenant ledger is the document that the property management has with the tenant. In other words, it's the internal document that says this Joe Schmo has paid $900 this month, $600 this month, and so on. So you want to get the lease agreement, the rent roll, and the tenant ledger, and all of them needs to match. And if the ledger says that the tenant is behind, if you find out about it prior to closing, again, you might be able to address it through the purchase negotiations. In other words, you could say to the current owner, hey, you need to bring this guy up to make him current, or hey, you need to take money out of your pocket and cover what he is late by, and then you can go deal with that person. Or you might not be able to do anything if the deal is so sweet that it's just like, what the hell, then you'll just grab it. Now, if you have one or two guys who are late, it's probably not a huge deal. On a big portfolio, let's say it's a 20 house portfolio, there are two guys who are late, it's a 10% late rents, not a huge deal. However, if half of your portfolio is being late, then you might not want to buy that thing. Or you might really want to have a conversation with the current seller to find out what's going on. Final document that you definitely want to look at due diligence would be the owner statements. And the owner statements is the document that the property management company presents to the owner every month, and it basically says how much rent we collected, how much went to management, how much went to maintenance, and all of the other ongoing expenses. And so those you want to see 3 or 4 last month owner statements, and then you want to see the annual numbers, because again, if the maintenance or the utilities is significantly out of the ballpark of what you are budgeting in your calculations, then you need to find out why. It doesn't always mean it's a problem, but you do need to find out why. So those are some of the thoughts that I have on property management. Oh, the other thing, let me talk really quick about financing. And I mentioned it briefly, but again, when you are going to be buying a portfolio like this, at least when I do it, I always finance them up to 75% with an institution. And if the property were fully vacant, then we wouldn't be able to do that. And so my math would be changing significantly at that point. If I can get 5% money, it means that I can be a lot more, I can offer a certain price, because to me it's always an income approach. I'm always looking at the cash flow. I want to create significant positive cash flow after my mortgage payment. So if my mortgage payment is 5% and I get a cash flow X, then I can go ahead and offer a certain price. Now on a vacant portfolio, A, I would bake in a much more risk into it, and B, I wouldn't have as good of a term. So as a buyer, I would always be able to offer less, significantly less for a vacant portfolio than I can for fully occupied. So on the reverse side, if you are the seller and you have a portfolio that you want to sell, it is my recommendation that you get it fully rented and you try and get your rents as high as possible. Again, any sane buyer will always bake some kind of a vacancy assumptions into their business model. No property or no apartment building or no portfolio ever stays rented 100% of the time for forever. So there is always going to be some kind of rotation. There is always going to be some kind of vacancy, and they will budget it for this. Even if you're 100% occupied at the moment, they will still budget 5 to 10% vacancy. So if a property owner decided to drop the rents to get 100% occupancy, what happens is they've just lowered the value of their portfolio, because it now appears to have lower net operating income because your rents are lower, but he's still not going to get the benefit for 100% vacancy. So if you own a 20-unit portfolio, you're better off with a higher rents and maybe 1 or 2 units vacant when you're trying to sell it, than with 100% units rented, with those 1 or 2 units rented at below market rates, because then you're actually hurting your own value. So that's just a thought. Again, when I'm on the buying side, I'm going to reverse all that. I'm going to say, hey, I'm going to try and find every possible way to get that portfolio for as little money as possible, and that's because that's my job. That's what I do. Anyway, hope you enjoyed this presentation. Again, there was no slideshow today. I'm going to switch again to my contact information, and but if you have any questions, please email to info@choiceforhomes.com. My phone number is 425-246-8390. And I always save a copy of all of my videos at our YouTube channel. So if you just go to YouTube and you search for Choice for Homes spelled with a number, then it will you'll see the videos. There are about 6 or 7 videos there now. So please, I hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to ask any questions, and give me a call or send me a note. Thank you.